Although the People's Crusade was a failure, the next force to arrive in Constantinople would prove far more formidable. This group was led by some of the most important noble lords in Europe. The most important of these were Raymond of Toulouse, who was one of the richest noblemen in France, Hugh of Vermandois, who was the brother of the King of France, Godfrey and his brother Baldwin of Bouillon, Robert, Duke of Normandy, the son of William the Conqueror, and Stephen, Count of Blois, was William the Conqueror's son-in-law. Robert, Count of Flanders, was also present, whose aunt Matilda had been the Conqueror's wife. They were also joined by the battle-hardened Normans of southern Italy, who were to play a critical role in the crusade, led by the son of Robert Guiscard, Bohemond of Taranto, and his 20-year-old nephew, Tancred of Hauteville. The whole force was estimated to have numbered at least 80,000 people, of whom over half were knights and foot soldiers, with the rest non-combatants. They set out for Constantinople in the summer and autumn of 1096, just as the People's Crusade was petering out. Bohemond traveled at a slow pace, not out of apathy, but because he knew he was by far the emperor's least favorite Latin prince, and didn't want to seem too eager to pour troops into the Byzantine territory. This was exactly the type of force that Alexius was hoping for, but its sheer size far exceeded his expectation. He organized excellent logistical support for the huge numbers that poured into the western provinces. Impressed by the size and splendor of Constantinople, the Franks and even Byzantium's former Norman enemies who had been fighting Alexius only 10 years earlier accepted his authority. This is primarily because Bohemond went to great lengths to show his humility and flattered Alexius at every opportunity. In contrast, when Hugh of Vermandois wrote to announce his arrival, he introduced himself as
King of Kings, the greatest of all beneath the heavens,
and demanded that
I should be met on my arrival and received with the pomp and ceremony appropriate to my noble birth.
Overawed by Constantinople, one crusader recorded,
"Oh, what a noble and beautiful city is Constantinople! How many monasteries and palaces it contains, constructed with wonderful skill! It would take too long to describe all the wealth that is there of every kind, of gold, of silver, all types of clothes and holy relics."
At the beginning of May, the Crusades marched out and headed southeast towards Nicaea, the target agreed to with the emperor. Nicaea was the capital city of the Sultanate of Rome and Kilij Arslan. They arrived on May 6th and soon put the city under siege. The problem wasn't just Kilij Arslan's Turkmen army, but the city walls were second only to those of Constantinople, 5 kilometers around and punctuated with 100 towers, as well as a double ditch. They were almost impregnable. The city also abutted a lake from which the Turks could bring supplies into the city. The sheer size of the crusading army impressed the Turks. Kilij Arslan traveled east to gather a force large enough to face the Crusaders, and in May 1097, he returned. In the woods behind the Crusader camp, a relief army emerged and engaged the Crusaders outside the city walls. The Turks assumed the Crusaders would be easily dispersed like the People's Crusade in the previous year. They were disabused of that notion, and a cavalry charge led by Raymond of Toulouse beat the Turks back. Although this was not a decisive victory, and Kilij Arslan retreated with a bulk of his forces intact, it marked a new beginning. The Crusaders were a force to be reckoned with. On June 1st, sappers managed to collapse a section of the wall, and daily engagements ensued to try to storm the breach. After several inconclusive days, the siege was turning into a stalemate. Since the city abutted a lake and the Turks could bring in supplies, it could tolerate any bombardment. What broke the impasse was initiative on the part of the emperor. Alexius sent a small flotilla of ships dragged 25 miles overland. These were launched quietly into Lake Ascanian. At daybreak on June 18th, the flotilla set sail across Ascania with a heavily armed crew. On the landward side of the city, a heavy assault was taking place.
When those in the city saw the ships, they were terrified out of their wits and, losing the will to resist, fell to the ground as if already dead. All howled, daughters with mothers, young men with young girls, the old with the young. Grief and misery were everywhere because there was no hope of escape.
Alexius secretly sent one of his generals into the city to start negotiations with the Turks, guaranteeing their safety if they surrendered, and the Turks agreed. It should be remembered that the majority of inhabitants of the city were Greek-speaking Romans, who wanted not only to return the city to the empire, but also save themselves from the inevitable pillage of the city if the Crusaders broke through. Alexius worried the secret arrangement might meet with the Crusaders' disapproval, but a Roman standard was soon raised on the walls to the sound of trumpets and horns. The city was proclaimed captured by the emperor. The capture of Nicaea was a triumph for Alexius, but for the Crusaders, it was only the beginning. Jerusalem lay over 1,000 miles away, deep within the Seljuk Turkish territory. Alexius held a council of war with the Crusaders, and he advised them to march across Anatolia to recapture that other great city to the east, Antioch, which was on the route to Jerusalem. Not only would the recapture of Antioch be a huge win for him, but just as importantly as the Crusaders marched across Anatolia, they would draw the Turks away from the eastern Aegean, allowing him to launch his long-awaited offensive to recover the island and cities on the coast that had fallen to the dangerous Emir Chukka, based at Smyrna. This strategy would be remarkably successful, and Smyrna, Ephesus, and all the towns and islands in the eastern Aegean were recaptured by the Romans in the course of 1097 and 1098. Meanwhile, a large crusading army rested for 10 days and then set off east to take the great city of Antioch.